at that time. But we don't know that, Da Vinci, up until finding these references, ever traveled to Egypt. We had no evidence of such. But now he's writing a letter to the Devatdar, or the lieutenant of the Sultan of Cairo. Interesting. And he gives a very conspicuously detailed account of the Taurus Mountains in particular. He goes into, I've never seen anyone describe a mountain like he describes a mountain. He goes into where it's situated, how it's exactly pointed to due north, how their sun falls on both sides equally throughout the daytime. He also goes into the structure of the Taurus Mountain. The structure. Now, usually you don't refer to a mountain as to its structure, because structure usually entails some degree of architecture. Clearly, mountains aren't architected, at least not in the sense that we're thinking of. And so why would he be using such words to describe the Great Pyramid? He goes into detail also about how he enters its great cavern inside. And so, just quoting his own words, the peaks of the great Mount Taurus. These peaks are of such a height that they seem to touch the sky. And in all the world, there's no part of the earth higher than its summit, and the rays of the sun always fall upon it on its east side for 4 hours before daytime. And being of the whitest stone, the Taurus Mountains consist in great part of limestone. It shines resplendently and fulfills the function to these. And then, of course, you have right on the outside, Taurus, right? The master apis lapis that we just heard about in that basin, right under those two very large hieroglyphic chevrons, telling us that it is actually Bull Mountain. And all these references you can find in Codex Atlanticus 1336 and 1337. It is not the subject of debate whatsoever that these were written in the hand of Da Vinci. So even art historians believe that, but art historians have discounted it to say that it must be fictional because of the flowery way that he describes the mountain, which doesn't really make sense. Well, they're not looking at it from a cryptographic perspective. Then he goes on to say, among the gloomy rocks, I came to the entrance of a great cavern, in front of me, which I stood some time, astonished and unaware of such a thing. Bending my back into an arch, I rested my left hand on my knee. So imagine he's kind of like left hand on my knee and held my right hand over my downcast and contracted eyebrows, often bending one way and then the other to see, right? And this being, okay, to see whether I could discover anything inside, and this being forbidden by the deep darkness within. And after having remained there some time, two contrary emotions arose in me, fear and desire. I think he chose every word deliberately, even that word arose. Fear of the threatening dark cavern and desire to see whether there were any marvelous thing within it. And candidly, that's exactly how I felt the very first time I walked into this room. I knew something was very special about it. I had no idea what it was going to be, and I had some fear, and also the fear was overcome by my desire to understand what that experience was going to be. And many people report the same feeling when they go into the King's Chamber. So, interestingly, over Christmas, I was kind of like, I had this feeling looking at La Belle Ferronnière that it was not actually some anonymous person, that it is actually Anne Boleyn, which, by the way, Boleyn comes from the word Bolin, which is bull, just like the 17th Earl of Oxford, who was actually the lover of her daughter, Queen Elizabeth. So Anne Boleyn was the mother of Queen Elizabeth I, and it turns out she lived in the same house with Leonardo da Vinci for 3 years, from 1516 until 1519. See, when the French invaded Milan, one of the first things that King Francis did was he called for Leonardo da Vinci. He wanted Leonardo da Vinci to be there because Leonardo had built this giant bronze horse. He was a sculptor also. And they had melted it down, most of it, to make bullets, right, for the Sforza family. But when Francis finally attacked and got control of Milan, he said, bring Leonardo to me. He's the most famous artist in the world at the time. And King Francis wanted to have a replica made of the Last Supper as well. He wanted that painting for himself as well. And so, you know, he actually invited Leonardo to move into his house at d'Amboise, which was the Chateau d'Amboise. Now, interestingly, he even had Leonardo become the architect for his new castle, which is the castle Chateau de Chambord, which is a very famous castle that is gorgeous. It's got these pirouettes. You'll recognize it when you see it right away. It has very unique architecture. And it was the seat of where the French kings lived for a long time. But basically, this, you know, Leonardo moved into the house at the same time that Anne Boleyn, as a late teenager at the time, was also living in the French court. Now, Anne Boleyn's older sister, you might remember from the movies about Henry VIII's life, was Mary Boleyn, and Mary Boleyn was one of the mistresses, the well-known mistresses of King Francis of France. There was a great rivalry also between Francis of France and King Henry VIII, who were cousins. So Anne Boleyn lived there, and she was referred to as the most enchanting woman of the king's court at the time. And there's rumor that she was also one of the mistresses of the King of France, and Mary Boleyn became a mistress of the King of England as well. But interestingly enough, in only January of this year, it started becoming more and more recognized that the picture that Leonardo had painted, everyone knew it was Leonardo's hand, was not just some daughter of an iron maker, but actually it was Anne Boleyn herself. And I remember positing this and then finding references to it online. And interestingly, there's even references to this where it refers to Sitting Bull, etc. King Henry VII and his son, like when we think of Western films of Sitting Bull, but she was Boleyn, and of course her grandson-in-law would have been the Earl of Oxford, which means bull crossing. Now I noticed though something else, because this picture was right from Wikipedia, and I noticed there was something around her head. And this was on our first day when we were in Egypt. I was kind of back in my room looking this up because I felt kind of, I don't know, drawn to it somehow. And I noticed something around her head, and sure enough, I changed the contrast on my iPhone so that you can do this. You know, you can look at different colors, etc., in the edit mode. And I noticed that there was an eye around her head. And the eye was oriented as if it were the eye of Horus. And you could even see that where her hairline is kind of glowing, right above her forehead, that would also make out exactly the image of an iris of a brown eye. So I thought that is really fascinating. So right down the center where her part would be where the iris would be. And he has her part there. So he's actually got kind of like a straight line telling us something about the pupil, right, as well. And then when you look at the rest of the image around, I started noticing something else, that it looks like there's a face on the left side of Anne Boleyn's head. You could see what looks like a nose, but it doesn't look very humanoid. It looks almost like a lion man. It even has a tongue sticking out. And you can kind of see that. If I show you where my cursor is here, you can see a nostril here, another nostril here, and a nose right here, and then what looks like a cat pad right where a cheek pad would be, and another one on this side, and then a tongue sticking out, right? And of course, here's the full eye as well. You can even find some squiggly type stuff here, which would be representative of the medulla oblongata, right, in the eye of Horus. And then in the Last Supper, was there anything in the Last Supper? So this was I think it was the second day we were in Egypt. And I was looking at the Last Supper painting. Now, of course, these paintings were painted all of them. The first piece of art that Da Vinci did after he was in Egypt was actually the Vitruvian Man. And that was in 1487. The first reference you'll find to the Vitruvian Man is 1487. And then you've got La Belle Ferronnière, as well as the Last Supper, which were paintings all subsequent to that. So when Susie was making the reference saying that she believed, and I agree with her, that all the paintings are connected, telling us a story for those with eyes that see, that would be all the paintings that were done after 1486 when he returned from his trips to Egypt. Now, a lot of people ask, what is this thing underneath the table at the Last Supper? Well, according to history, a portal doorway was cut through the Milan fresco as the painter was unrecognizable, which is totally ridiculous. So they're basically saying that this must have been done in 1652. There was a doorway made here. Everybody knew who Leonardo da Vinci was during his lifetime. They knew he was the most famous painter in the world in 1652 as well. So that is absolutely crazy that that's even the reference you'll find in the Wikipedia reference on this. But no one knows what was there before, or if even that 1652 reference is correct. Now, what you'll also notice is that above Jesus in this, you'll find the Eye of Ra. And so the Eye of Ra also is kind of prominently showing up inside a pediment above Jesus's head. And we'll see a little bit more close up on that in a moment. But it also has what looks like a thin slit for a pupil, almost like a cat eye. There's a lot of other writing and stuff that kind of looks like it's script against this back wall, but it's kind of hard to make out. We don't know exactly what it is. It looks like there might be stuff hidden in these tapestries as well, and we don't know what those things are. But while we were in Egypt, we put this up on a screen, and I had everybody look at it to see what they could see inside of it. Now you'll also see here is Da Vinci's face superimposed on top of Peter's face. And this is Judas holding a bag of silver because he betrayed Jesus. And you have Jesus putting his right hand down, which is sort of like justice, and the left hand up is mercy. And he's wearing red, which would be the masculine side. Justice, mercy, he's wearing blue, which is the feminine side. You've got Thomas here pointing up at something. Well, what are we looking at? We don't know, right? Maybe he's pointing that there's something up here. We don't know. You see, these people over here, Bartholomew, that are looking down at Judas and Mary Magdalene and Peter, who has his hand down Mary Magdalene's shirt, and he's holding a knife behind his back. Or is that Mary holding the knife and Peter holding her wrist? It's hard to tell. It's very difficult to tell. And they're both oriented right at this point over this door or portal, which is very interesting too. Right? So what can we find in this? The Last Supper was famously encrypted, but how much more might yet be revealed? Now, you've seen in the movie, the Da Vinci Code, that this represented the feminine, right? This V, which is basically water. It's the symbol for water in alchemy. The triangle pointed downwards. But also, I noticed in this that this was matching up when I measure from here to here versus from here to here. And you have some slight overlap, like a yin-yang, where her raiment is overlapping into the space that would be Jesus' side, and his hand is overlapping into the space that would be her side. But I also noticed right here the faint shape of an omega right in her cloak. Now, interestingly as well, the shape of Jesus is famously the letter A. And the angle on this is, again, the Great Pyramid angle that we're looking at. So we've got an alpha chi omega, and the chi to me has always represented the mirror, a mirror consciousness. But wait a minute. When we started taking pictures of the king's chamber, we noticed that the proportions of the room were quite